She thought calling 911 would scare me into unlocking my own pool, but what she didn't know was that one petty HOA complaint would unravel the darkest secret our quiet neighborhood ever hid, exposing a web of lies, illegal surveillance, and a Karen who had been watching us all for years. So if you love shocking HOA revenge stories where the bully finally meets someone smarter, stronger, and 10 steps ahead, hit subscribe right now because this story proves that sometimes locking a pool unlocks the truth. It started on the hottest Saturday of the year when I finally locked my pool, not because I wanted to annoy anyone but because my insurance company had sent a formal warning after strangers from outside the neighborhood kept sneaking in at night, leaving beer cans, broken glass, and once even a used diaper floating in the shallow end. And while my house backed up to a greenbelt and the pool fence was well within city code, the HOA had always treated it like a community attraction despite it being fully on my deed, which I knew because I'd paid extra for a land survey when I bought the place. But Karen, real name Linda, though no one dared call her that, had decided years ago that anything visible was shared, so when she marched over that afternoon with her clipboard, sunglasses, and phone already recording, demanding I unlock the gate immediately for the children, I calmly told her no, explained the liability issue, and even offered a compromise of scheduled access with signed waivers, which only made her lips tighten into that familiar smile that meant she'd already decided to punish me, and she stormed off saying I'd regret being selfish, words that echoed less like a threat and more like a promise. And sure enough, an hour later 2 police cruisers rolled up, lights flashing, neighbors peeking through blinds as Karen stood dramatically pointing at my fence claiming I was endangering lives, running an illegal private facility, and denying emergency access to water, a phrase so ridiculous even one of the officers raised an eyebrow. But Karen was committed, loudly insisting the HOA had authority over all amenities, and when the officer asked for documentation she produced a thick binder, flipping pages with practiced confidence, only for the second officer to quietly tell me that none of this justified a 911 call and that misuse of emergency services was a serious matter, which sent Karen into a flustered rant about community safety. Yet as they left with nothing but a warning for her, she shot me a look full of venom, and that's when I noticed something odd. A small black dome barely visible under the eave of the HOA clubhouse across the path, angled not toward the entrance but toward my backyard, and once I noticed it I couldn't unsee the others, tiny dark lenses tucked into trees, lampposts, even a birdhouse, all positioned not for security of common areas but trained on specific homes, my pool included, and that night curiosity turned into unease, then into cold anger as I reviewed my own security footage and saw Karen walking the neighborhood at dawn with a tablet, stopping, zooming, tapping notes, always lingering near those domes. So instead of confronting her I did what she never expected. I stayed quiet and started digging, pulling public records, HOA budgets, and vendor contracts, noticing vague line items like environmental monitoring services and community enhancement tech, both funneling money to an LLC registered under a shell address, an LLC that, after some late-night research, traced back to Karen's brother-in-law, a failed private investigator with a revoked license. And when I shared my suspicions discreetly with a neighbor who worked in IT, he helped me scan wireless traffic and confirmed there were multiple encrypted feeds transmitting constantly from the common areas to a private server, not owned by the HOA but by that same LLC, which meant this wasn't about safety, it was surveillance, illegal surveillance, and suddenly small neighborhood dramas made sense. How Karen always knew who painted without approval, who rented rooms quietly, whose adult kids stayed too long, whose dog barked after hours, and the twist that made my stomach drop was realizing she'd used that information to fine, harass, and even force out families she didn't like, driving down their sale prices before investors connected to her friends bought the homes, flipping them for profit, turning her HOA presidency into a quiet empire built on fear and spying. And the pool was just the trigger because it was the one thing she couldn't control. So instead of blowing the whistle immediately, I set a trap, hosting a small legal poolside gathering with clear signage, permits posted, everything by the book, and as expected Karen showed up with her phone, shouting violations, stepping deliberately into camera range, and within minutes she texted her security team, which I knew would activate the network. So at the same moment my neighbor initiated a packet capture and logged every transmission, timestamped and mapped, and when Karen smugly announced she'd documented everything, I calmly handed her a folder containing still images of her cameras, maps of their locations, copies of the HOA funds trail, and a printed email draft addressed to the State Attorney General, the FCC, and a class action attorney representing multiple former residents, and the color drained from her face so fast it was almost cinematic, but she tried to recover, laughing nervously, calling it a bluff, until 3 days later when state investigators arrived unannounced at the clubhouse, seizing servers, disconnecting cameras, and interviewing board members who suddenly claimed ignorance, while neighbors gathered outside whispering as Karen was escorted out, still arguing that it was for the good of the community. And the real twist came weeks later when the lawsuits hit, not just from residents but from the city itself for illegal use of surveillance equipment and misuse of emergency services. And as depositions unfolded, it became clear Karen had called 911 dozens of times over the years, not out of concern but as a control tactic, weaponizing authority to intimidate. And every call became evidence, every fine she issued unraveled, and one by one families she'd driven out testified, reclaiming lost money and dignity, while the HOA dissolved under legal pressure and reformed with strict transparency rules, open budgets, and an outright ban on any monitoring beyond basic entrance cameras. And as for my pool, it stayed locked when I wanted it locked and open when I invited people, but more importantly it became a symbol, because the day the cameras came down, neighbors I barely knew brought chairs, food, laughter, kids splashing freely with parents signing waivers and sharing stories of how close they'd come to selling, how watched they'd felt, how powerless. And standing there I realized Karen never understood what she was really afraid of. It wasn't rules being broken, it was control being questioned, and by calling 911 over a locked pool she'd exposed the one thing she couldn't hide, proving that the loudest bullies often crumble the moment someone calmly turns on the light and shows everyone what's been hiding in the dark.